At my wedding reception, my mother-in-law stood up and announced, "This marriage won't last 6 months. I've already consulted my lawyer." My husband just laughed and said, "Mom's always right." I smiled, cut the cake, and handed them both an envelope. When they opened it, my husband dropped his glass and his mother went pale. I, 32M, stood there in my rented tuxedo, watching my brand new mother-in-law tap her champagne glass with a fork, and I knew something was coming. The reception hall went quiet. 200 guests turned their attention to her, expecting the usual sentimental speech about how happy she was to welcome me into the family. Instead, she looked directly at me with this cold smile and announced that this marriage wouldn't last 6 months. She'd already consulted her lawyer, she said, just to be prepared for the inevitable divorce. The room fell silent. You could hear the ice settling in glasses. My wife sat frozen beside me, her face drained of color. I looked at her, waiting for her to say something, to defend us, to tell her mother she was out of line. But she just stared down at her plate like she was trying to disappear into it. Then my husband laughed. Not a nervous laugh or an uncomfortable one. A genuine, amused laugh. He told everyone that his mom was always right, that she had a sixth sense about these things. He said it like it was the most natural thing in the world to bet against your own marriage at your wedding reception. I felt something crack inside me. Not my heart exactly. Something colder and harder than that. I stood up slowly, still smiling. I'd learned a long time ago that the best weapon in moments like these was composure. I walked over to the cake, picked up the knife, and cut 2 perfect slices. The photographer kept snapping pictures, probably thinking this was all part of some planned moment. I placed each slice on fine china plates and handed one to my mother-in-law and one to my husband. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out 2 envelopes I'd prepared weeks ago. I handed them over with the same pleasant smile I'd worn throughout the ceremony. My husband opened his first. I watched his face change as he read. The color drained from his cheeks. His hands started shaking, and the champagne glass he'd been holding slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor. His mother tore into hers a second later, and I saw her go absolutely pale. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. The guests started murmuring. Some were trying to see what was in the envelopes. Others were looking at me like I'd just pulled a grenade pin. Inside each envelope was a prenuptial agreement, but not the kind they'd been expecting me to sign. This one was my version, prepared by my lawyer over the past 3 months. It outlined exactly what would happen in the event of a divorce initiated within the first year of marriage. Every asset I'd brought into this marriage was protected. The house we were supposed to move into, the one they'd been treating as theirs already, was in my name alone. The business I'd built from nothing over the past decade was locked down tight. But the real kicker was the clause about infidelity and fraud. See, I'd spent the last 6 months doing my homework. My husband had been so confident that I was desperate to marry him that he'd gotten sloppy. I'd hired a private investigator after the 3rd time I caught him texting someone at odd hours. The investigator had given me a file thick enough to stop a door. Photos, text message logs, bank statements showing cash withdrawals and payments to a woman across town. An apartment lease in his name that I'd never known about. Credit card statements for jewelry I'd never received. He'd been planning this from the start. The whole courtship had been a setup. His mother wasn't just overbearing. She was the architect. She'd pushed him to pursue me after learning about my business. She'd coached him on what to say, how to act. She'd been the one who suggested we get married quickly, claiming it was romantic. All of it designed to get access to my money. The prenup in those envelopes laid all of this out in clean, legal language. It also included a clause that stated if either of them contested it or attempted to manipulate me into tearing it up, I had the right to annul the marriage immediately, and they would be liable for all wedding expenses. Every single cent. The venue, the catering, the band, the flowers, the photographer. Everything. And I'd made sure this was an expensive wedding. My husband finally found his voice. He asked me what the hell this was, his voice cracking with barely contained rage. His mother was already on her feet, her face twisted with fury. She called me manipulative and accused me of trapping her son. The irony wasn't lost on me. I told them both very calmly that I'd simply taken precautions. I said I'd been raised to protect myself, and that nothing in those documents would matter if we had a genuine, faithful marriage. But if anyone was planning on a quick divorce to cash out, well, they'd be disappointed. My wife, my actual wife, was still sitting at the table in shock. She finally looked up at me with tears in her eyes and asked me if I'd married her knowing all of this. I told her the truth. I'd married her hoping I was wrong, hoping the evidence was somehow misleading, hoping that when the moment came, she'd stand up for us instead of sitting there in silence while her mother humiliated me. But she hadn't, and that told me everything I needed to know. The reception dissolved into chaos after that. Half the guests were taking sides. Some thought I was brilliant. Others thought I'd ruined what should have been a beautiful day. My mother-in-law was screaming at her lawyer on the phone in the corner. My husband was surrounded by his groomsmen, all of them talking in urgent, hushed tones. I walked out of that reception hall with my head high. My best man followed me, along with a handful of friends who'd had my back from the beginning. We went to a bar downtown and had our own celebration. They told me I'd done the right thing, that I'd saved myself from years of misery. I wanted to believe them. Update 1. It's been 3 weeks since the wedding. I'm still processing everything. The day after the reception, my wife finally called me. She was crying, asking me to come home so we could talk. I told her I needed space first. She kept insisting that she loved me, that her mother had ambushed her just as much as she'd ambushed me. She claimed she'd been frozen with shock and didn't know how to react. I didn't believe her. When someone shows you who they are, you listen. She'd had months to warn me about her mother's true nature. She'd had every opportunity to stand beside me instead of sitting there like a spectator at my humiliation. My lawyer contacted me to say that my mother-in-law had indeed called her attorney. They were exploring options to contest the prenup, but it was airtight. I'd made sure of that. Every clause had been reviewed by 3 different lawyers. There were no loopholes, no gray areas. If they tried to fight it, they'd only make things worse for themselves. My husband started texting me constantly. At first, the messages were angry. He called me paranoid and controlling. He said I destroyed our marriage before it even began. Then the tone shifted. He started apologizing, saying he'd made mistakes but that he wanted to work through them. He claimed the apartment had been for his sister, that the woman in the photos was just a friend going through a hard time. He had an excuse for everything. I didn't respond to any of it. My lawyer had advised me to keep all communication through her office. So that's what I did. The thing that surprised me most was how many people came out of the woodwork to tell me they'd seen it coming. Colleagues from work, mutual friends, even some of my husband's own relatives reached out to say they'd always thought something was off about him and his mother. One of his cousins told me that his mother had done something similar to his father years ago, that manipulation and control were just how she operated. She'd driven away 3 of her son's previous girlfriends by making their lives miserable. I wish someone had told me sooner. But then again, would I have listened? I'd been so caught up in what I thought was love that I'd ignored red flags the size of billboards. The way he'd always deflected when I asked about his finances. The way his mother had keys to his apartment and would show up unannounced. The way he'd pushed for a joint bank account immediately after we got engaged. I told myself these were just quirks, things we'd work through. Now I saw them for what they were, warning signs. My wife showed up at my office one afternoon. Security called to ask if I wanted her sent away. I told them to let her up. I don't know why. Maybe some part of me still wanted to hear what she had to say. She looked terrible. Her eyes were red and swollen. She'd lost weight. She sat across from my desk and told me she was sorry for everything. She said her mother had always been overbearing, but that this had crossed every line. She claimed she'd spent the weeks since the wedding standing up to her mother for the first time in her life, that they'd barely been speaking. I asked her why she'd never stood up before, why she'd let her mother control everything from the wedding planning to where we'd live to what kind of relationship we'd have. She didn't have a good answer. She just cried and said she'd been raised to keep the peace, to avoid conflict, to trust that her mother knew best. I told her that wasn't good enough. Marriage was supposed to be a partnership between 2 people, not 3. I couldn't spend the rest of my life wondering if she'd choose her mother over me every time things got difficult. She begged me to give her another chance. She said she'd go to therapy, cut her mother off if that's what it took, anything to save our marriage. I told her I'd think about it. I didn't promise anything. Update 2. 2 months after the wedding, I filed for annulment. My lawyer said we had grounds based on fraud and misrepresentation. The evidence from the private investigator was overwhelming. My husband had indeed been maintaining a separate life with another woman. The apartment wasn't for his sister. The jewelry had gone to her. The whole thing had been a long con, and I'd almost fallen for it. My wife contested the annulment. She hired her own lawyer and filed a response claiming that despite her mother's behavior and her own failure to act, she genuinely wanted to make the marriage work. Her lawyer argued that we should attend counseling, that one bad moment shouldn't define our entire relationship. But it wasn't one bad moment. It was a pattern I'd finally allowed myself to see. During the discovery process, more truth came out. My mother-in-law had actually encouraged my husband to pursue me after she'd done research on my business. She'd seen articles about my success and decided I was a good target. She'd coached him on every step of the courtship. Where to take me for dates, what to say, even what gifts to buy. The private investigator had found emails between them discussing the best strategy to get me to propose. The other woman came forward during all of this. She reached out to my lawyer directly. She said she'd been seeing my husband for almost a year, that he'd told her he was in a relationship but planning to end it soon. He'd promised her they'd be together once he'd secured his financial future. She hadn't known about the wedding until afterward when she'd seen photos on social media. She felt used and wanted to set the record straight. Her testimony destroyed any remaining argument my wife's lawyer tried to make. The annulment went through. Just like that, the marriage that was supposed to last a lifetime was erased as if it had never happened. The financial fallout for them was severe. Because my husband had contested the prenup and the annulment, the penalty clauses kicked in. He was liable for the full cost of the wedding, plus my legal fees, plus damages for emotional distress and fraud. The total came to just over $300,000. His mother tried to pay part of it, but it wasn't enough. They had to sell her house. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I just felt tired. I'd wasted 2 years of my life on someone who'd never loved me at all. I'd been nothing more than a business opportunity to them. My friends kept telling me I'd dodged a bullet. They were right, but it didn't make it hurt less. I genuinely believed I was building a life with someone. I'd imagined kids, growing old together, all of it. And it had all been a lie. Update 3. 6 months after the annulment, I finally started to feel like myself again. I'd thrown myself into work, expanded the business, hired new people. Staying busy helped. It kept me from dwelling on what might have been. My ex-wife tried to reach out a few times. She'd send emails apologizing, saying she'd cut her mother out of her life completely, that she understood why I couldn't trust her but hoped someday I might forgive her. I never responded. There was nothing left to say. Her mother, my former mother-in-law, ended up moving to a different state to live with her sister. The shame of what she'd done had apparently become too much to bear in our city where everyone knew the story. The gossip had spread like wildfire. She'd gone from being a respected member of her social circle to being known as the woman who tried to scam her son-in-law. My ex-husband's life fell apart in ways I hadn't anticipated. The other woman wanted nothing to do with him once the truth came out. His reputation in his industry took a massive hit. Word got around about what he'd done, and clients started dropping him. He'd built his career partly on being personable and trustworthy. Now no one trusted him. He sent me one final message about a year after everything ended. He said he was sorry, that he'd been weak and let his mother manipulate him into something he'd never should have done. He claimed he'd actually developed real feelings for me somewhere along the way, that it had stopped being just about money. He said he understood if I never forgave him, but wanted me to know he regretted everything. I don't know if I believed him. Maybe some small part of it was true. Maybe he had started to feel something genuine, and that's why he'd looked so destroyed when I handed him that envelope. Or maybe it was just another manipulation, one last attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. I deleted the message without responding. The truth is, I'm doing okay now. Better than okay, actually. I've learned to trust my instincts more. I've learned that when someone shows you who they are, you should believe them the first time. I've learned that protecting yourself isn't selfish or paranoid. It's necessary. I still think about that moment sometimes. Standing there at my own wedding reception, watching my husband laugh at the idea that our marriage was doomed, seeing my wife unable to meet my eyes. The shock on their faces when they opened those envelopes. The satisfaction I felt in that instant was real, even if it was followed by months of pain and disappointment. People ask me if I regret going through with the wedding knowing what I knew. The honest answer is no. If I'd confronted them beforehand, they would have denied everything, and I'd have spent years wondering if I'd been wrong. This way, I got to see exactly who they were in the moment that mattered most. They showed me they couldn't be trusted, and I was able to walk away with my assets and my dignity intact. I'm not sure when I'll be ready to date again. The whole experience left scars that are taking time to heal. But I'm not bitter. I'm just more careful, more aware, more willing to walk away at the first sign that something isn't right. And if I ever do get married again, you can bet there will be a prenup. Not because I'm expecting the worst, but because I've learned that hope is beautiful, but preparation is smart. Love is worth the risk, but your future is worth protecting. That wedding reception was supposed to be the beginning of my happily ever after. Instead, it was the moment I learned to save myself. And maybe that's its own kind of happy ending. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with friends or family who might enjoy it too.